Today, women make up more than half of the American electorate and are more engaged than ever in our politics. Yet we remain marginalized in government and elective office.
It's important for women to have a voice in this democracy because we see women being disproportionately affected across our society in so many areas.
The reality is the news industry is already gendered. The 19th is working to level the playing field.
Our newsroom is named for the 19th Amendment, but with an asterisk, the recognition of the omission of certain women from the franchise, from access to the ballot.
We are firm believers that all issues are women's issues. Our readers are people who care about those issues, who care deeply about the intersection of gender, politics, and policy, and want a more nuanced approach to that politics and policy journalism.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Live with the 19th.
With live events and interviews, the 19th is fostering civil conversations and community building that brings our readers into direct contact with the people who represent them.
There's never been a Black woman governor in American history.
I think that our newsroom being as diverse as it is, it means that we're looking and telling stories of women that maybe had not been previously represented in media before.
Our goal is to launch the first newsroom that is truly reflective of the nation's women.
There's more women running now than ever have been before, and people want to be informed.
Because what we know is that women are eager to have conversations about politics and often do not feel like they have a safe space to do that. We want to create that community for women, and we want to create that community for women everywhere.
Newsrooms need to be more inclusive. They need to better reflect their communities. The 19th has the opportunity to do that from the ground floor, and we're not wasting that opportunity.
There's never been a better moment than right now.
The 19th is the newsroom that we've been waiting for.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Live with the 19th, a virtual event series that gives you a front row seat to conversations at the intersection of gender, politics, and public policy. I'm Emily Ramshaw, the co-founder and CEO of the 19th, a nonprofit, nonpartisan newsroom that launched this summer with gender equity at its core. Today, we are so pleased to bring you back-to-back conversations on the 2020 women's electorate. We'll first have editor-at-large Errin Haines joined by Valerie Jarrett, former senior advisor to President Barack Obama. Then Washington correspondent Amanda Becker will interview Kellyanne Conway, former counselor to President Donald Trump. In both conversations, we'll discuss what messaging resonated and what didn't, who stepped up and who stepped out, and what the pollsters and the media missed in this historic election cycle. If you liked today's event, you can post about it on social media by using the hashtag #the19thlive. You can also get notified about future events by signing up for our free newsletter at 19thnews.org/subscribe. Finally, I want to tell you that we're in the midst of our fall member drive, and we have a goal of reaching 10,000 new members by the end of this year. We hope you'll join us today at 19thnews.org/membership. Now, I'd like to welcome Errin Haines to kick off this conversation with Valerie Jarrett.
Good afternoon. I hope that everyone had a safe and happy Thanksgiving. I'm Errin Haines, editor-at-large at the 19th. Well, it's kind of unbelievable, but we're about a month past Election Day, which really feels like the perfect time to reflect on the ups, downs, twists, and turns of a tumultuous 2020 election cycle. At the 19th, we've spent much of the past year really trying to reframe the narrative around the majority of the electorate, namely women, and the role that they had to play in shaping our democracy and our politics, both in 2020 and beyond. So I want to unpack this election cycle with somebody who really helped me to understand the role of women in the 2020 election and this electorate. And that is somebody who I'm sure will need no introduction to this audience, but I will go ahead and do it anyway and keep it short. Valerie Jarrett is a veteran of Democratic politics and served as senior advisor to President Barack Obama, America's first Black president. She was also assistant to the president for public engagement and intergovernmental affairs and chaired the White House Council on Women and Girls. Valerie currently chairs When We All Vote, the voter engagement organization founded by former First Lady Michelle Obama, and is author of Finding My Voice, My Journey to the West Wing and the Path Forward. Valerie, it's so good to be with you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Errin. Good afternoon to you and to your audience.
Absolutely. So look, let's just get right into the conversation. My story about a month ago, as voters were headed to the polls, were that women were really the deciders of this election. But this election was not one that was a mandate. And while Joe Biden won a majority of women, it wasn't a landslide. We know that preliminary data suggests that white women voted for President Trump in even larger numbers than they did in 2016, and that Republican women made gains in the House. My first question to you is, what really was your biggest takeaway on the message for Democrats with respect to women voters in 2020?
Well, I think women played a very instrumental role in this election, and it was closer than I thought it was going to be. Certainly, it was closer than the polls led us to believe. And I think it's an indication that our country is pretty divided. And this is why I think it's an opportunity for women, because we're good at not letting perfect be the enemy of the good, and reaching across the aisle, trying to build consensus. And I think that's what I hear as I travel around the country. People are so tired, Errin, of this polarization in politics, and they're focusing on what's happening in their households. And their households in the midst of this climate are under enormous stress, whether it's people who have lost loved ones or have had loved ones sick for prolonged periods of time, those of us living in fear of catching the COVID-19, people who've lost their jobs or are worried about losing their jobs, parents who are trying to figure out how to juggle their children who are or are not in school, going back and forth, homeschooling them, trying to supervise them while they're on the internet, or sending them to school and worrying about whether or not they're going to get sick or bring something home.
Yeah.
So this has been a really stressful year. And in the midst of that, what is encouraging, the silver light for me, is that a record number of Americans turned out to vote. President-elect Biden received more votes than anyone who's ever run for office before. And President Trump won the second most number of votes ever cast before. And so to see that kind of activism and engagement in our country is a good sign, regardless of party affiliation.
Yeah. Yeah. Just to follow up on that, you had Joe Biden saying that this election, he really saw it as a battle for the soul of America. And it feels to me that the election was really kind of the first part of that battle. There's been a lot of conversation about, what the Democratic Party should do to even, if they should or how they should reach out to Trump supporters. I'm wondering what you think about whether the Biden-Harris administration and their supporters have an obligation to reach out to really help to heal the country going forward, and what role the outgoing president and his voters have to play in bridging that divide.
So, Errin, I think absolutely the president-elect, the vice president-elect, the entire team that he is already assembling, and we've seen in the recent weeks since he became the president-elect, that he is forming both his White House and his cabinet, reflecting the rich diversity of our country, breaking all kinds of historical barriers for women, for people of color. But what he said during the campaign has always stayed with me, when he said, I'm going to campaign as a Democrat, but I'm going to govern as a president for all of America. And I think part of the reason that he won, one of the many reasons that he won, I should say, is that struck a chord with Americans who don't want to see their president partisan. They want to see their president who isn't focusing on campaigning and politics, but is focusing on them. And so I think he has a huge responsibility to reach out to Trump supporters and to try to help heal our country, leading by example. And what is disappointing over the last several weeks, if not the last nearly 4 years, is an unwillingness of President Trump to see himself as a president for all of America, and the amount of time and energy that has gone into trying to create an impression that the election was rigged, where every lawsuit's been thrown out. Every expert, regardless of party, has said that this election is fair, including the president's own former head of cybersecurity and infrastructure security, the office in the federal government responsible for ensuring the integrity of our election. And the response was to fire him. And we've seen the kind of maligning of people who are responsible for the integrity of our election coming from the White House, directed at both parties. And that does not only break down the confidence in the outcome of the election, but it acts to further polarize us. And so, of course, what I would like to see is the president-elect act the way all of his predecessors have, congratulate the winner, encourage his team to cooperate, do that from the highest office so that it sets a tone throughout the government. Yes, in fact, they have decided to move forward with the transition, but it would be so much more powerful if he did what President Bush did for us and what President Obama did for him, which is to say, I want you to cooperate fully. I want a smooth and seamless transition, because that's what's good for our country. So that is lacking.
Yes, indeed. And so absent of that, I guess, how optimistic are you that the country can come back together, that voters, these fractured voters in this electorate will be able to come back together without that kind of example from Republican leadership?
Well, they'll get it from the president. And I do think the vast majority of Americans are good and decent people, and they don't want acrimony. They don't want to be polarized from one another. They actually just want to work hard, raise their families, retire with dignity, hope that their children do better than they did, take care of their basic needs. And right now, I think that that's being frayed. It's being frayed in terms of the rhetoric and the tone, but it's also, for the first time that I can remember, we're seeing long food lines in America, Americans who are hungry, children who are going to bed hungry. By the end of the year, we're going to have millions and millions of Americans experiencing food insecurity, not to mention those who are sick. So this is a time where families across America are under enormous pressure, enormous stress, and yet and still they showed up to vote, yet and still they do unbelievable acts of kindness for their neighbors, for perfect strangers. And I think that the difference will be that President-elect Biden will set a tone of healing, will lead by example, will make sure that those he surrounds himself with believe that they are there in devotion to public service, not in terms of their own interests, be they political or personal. And I think that will help facilitate our country's healing. But I don't want to underestimate how important it is that we, each of us, think of what we can do to lead by example, that we don't just simply wait for a president, but that we say to ourselves, are we being kind? Do we believe that we are our brother's keeper, our sister's keeper? Are we supporting not just our own family, but the strangers who are the essential workers, the healthcare workers, the law enforcement who are doing their job in a lawful way, the many people around this country who sacrifice so mightily for the rest of us to be able to do well? And I still believe in that core goodness of most people.
Yeah, well, certainly that healing is a two-way street, and one of the themes of this pandemic, which is still kind of an open question, is, we're all in this together. So, seeing how that bears out next year will certainly be something to watch. I want to come back to looking to the future of the Democratic Party, because, President Trump did make some inroads with Black voters as he touted what he saw as his record on jobs and criminal justice reform. And he also won a significant number of Latino voters. And both are groups of voters that Democrats need as part of a winning coalition. So going forward, what do you think, or what advice would you have for the party to shore up this critical part of its base?
Well, first of all, let's set here. The vast majority of Black people, the vast majority of Latino people voted for President-elect Biden. I got my B's confused. And so did he make some inroads? Yes, but still in single digits. And so I don't think that we should be over-torquing what the difference in the vote was this time, say, compared to last time. But I think what Joe Biden realizes is that he is going to have to not just reach out in terms of his words, but also in his deeds. And as he rolls out his agenda to contain the coronavirus, recognizing the disparate impacts that it has had on communities of color, the disparate job loss suffered by women, that it is very important that he does build back better. And so I think when you see the kind of relief bill that he supports, when you see the effort that he puts into containing this coronavirus, as well as ensure that the vaccine is distributed in a fair and equitable way, people are going to begin to realize that he does have their best interests at heart. And one thing I can tell you, having worked for Joe Biden for 8 years in the Obama White House, the Obama-Biden White House, is that he will wake up every single day thinking of how to earn our respect and trust and delivering on our behalf. And I am confident that in time, people will recognize the kind of leadership he provides, and the support that may have held back a little bit this time will be overflowing in the course of his 4 years in office.
Yeah. You mentioned the unfolding diversity. We're still finding out, how President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris's administration is shaping up. But, we certainly assert here at the 19th that representation matters. And so I want to ask, how satisfied are you with the representation you've been seeing so far, particularly of Black women at senior levels in this unfolding administration? Yeah. And, do you feel like there were enough Black women at high enough levels during the Obama-Biden years to create this kind of pipeline for Black women's leadership in this moment?
Yeah, I think a lot of the women who were part of the Obama-Biden administration have advanced. They had experience over the 8 years that they were in office, and they are now ripe for positions of leadership in this administration. I am heartened to see that he's breaking ceilings all over the place, putting women in positions that they have not been in before. And I think that he's just getting started. I mean, we have our first Treasury Secretary who is a woman who will be principally responsible for guiding us through this recovery. We will be represented on the world stage by an African-American woman as a UN ambassador who is a career diplomat who will restore the confidence that not just Americans have, but those who interface with us around the world do through her diplomacy and setting a tone in an agency that has just been completely decimated as a result of this administration. And he's just getting started. I think the fact that his entire communications team is comprised of women, Black women, white women, in both the president and vice president's office, that is unprecedented. And I think it is going to be so extraordinary to see a woman in the number 1 and 2 position in the press office. So when someone goes to the podium, whether it's Jen or Corinne, we know they're going to tell you the truth. They're going to have their facts straight, and they are going to restore confidence in the message that comes out of the White House. Also very important. So I think across the board, I am very pleased with the team he has assembled so far. I know everybody on the team and the kind of experience, integrity, character, empathy, track record of leadership, and moral compass that only points in one direction, true north. And the fact that they also know one another means that he's not going to just have the best players on the field, he's going to have the best team from day one. And that's something that we didn't necessarily have in President Obama's administration because many of us had not worked together before. But these folks are seasoned, they know each other's strengths, and they respect and like one another. And I think that inures not just to the president's benefit, but to the country's benefit.
Yeah. Well, you certainly are alluding to kind of the advantages of having these folks who have kind of risen through the ranks and come through this pipeline. But I want to ask, too, just about, some of the people who may be critical and concerned about just the number of Obama era alumni that are populating this new administration. I mean, talk about how do you feel that the Biden-Harris administration is going to be different and maybe what the work left undone that they can address, in this new administration?
Well, remember the person he picked to be at the top of the ticket with him, Senator Harris, now Vice President-elect Harris, was not a part of the administration. And so immediately he reached out to someone who was a seasoned public official, but not a part of the inner circle that President Obama and now President-elect Biden have formed. But I think as the team fills out, and we are still at the very beginning of his rolling out his cabinet, that we are going to see seasoned, experienced public servants. This is no time for on-the-job training. And so I think the fact that he has picked people with whom he has worked before and who have worked with each other before, who have long experience in our administration and in other administrations, means that they are prepared to be creative and tackle the challenges of tomorrow. This isn't about going back to the Obama-Biden administration. It's about picking people who are absolutely prepared on day one to face the challenges that await them. And they are daunting challenges. And so I commend him for picking the folks in whom he has confidence and whom he has seen in tough situations. He knows how they're going to respond to the challenges, and he will challenge them to be creative and come up with new solutions because we have new challenges that lie ahead.
Yeah, perfect segue into what I wanted to ask you about next, as somebody who knows how critical the window of opportunity really is within the first 100 days of an administration. I'm wondering what you think President Biden and Vice President Harris should be focused on as legislative priorities in a potentially divided Congress.
Well, I think, first of all, since there does not seem to be an appetite among the Republicans to pass a relief bill, we're going to have to get a relief bill passed. We know that many of the benefits are running out. Workers, as evidenced by these food lines, are out of work and are going to need assistance. First responders are going to need equipment. We're going to have to ensure that we have the resources to distribute the vaccine as it becomes available and coordinate with the governors across the country. And so being prepared to both get our arms around the COVID-19 and rebuild our economy are going to require the support of Congress. And I'm hoping that the American people will put pressure on their elected representatives in the Republican Party to say it's time to end this partisan stalemate and focus on us, the American people. I also think that there's a lot that he can do by executive order, and whether it's rejoining the World Health Organization so that we can be a part of the global strategy to contain this virus, another huge threat that should be important to women and men all across America is climate change. So rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, he can do that by executive action, making sure that the dreamers who are in our country and who have been living in excruciating limbo over the last 4 years have some certainty. He can do that by executive action, although I would encourage Congress to pass the comprehensive bill that I know President-elect Biden has said he's going to send up to the Hill for immigration reform once and for all, providing a path to citizenship, allowing people to have some certainty. This has always been a country of immigrants and a country of laws, and there's no reason why we can't do both, and he's committed to doing that. So he has a robust agenda. I still believe we have a great opportunity to win those last two seats in the Senate coming out of Georgia. I know that people like Stacey Abrams have been working now for a couple of years to register people to vote, and there's a lot of attention on those seats. And so if the Democrats win those seats, then of course the possibilities for what they can get done in Congress grows exponentially. Joe Biden has said he's interested in tax reform, raising taxes on the very wealthy and our largest corporations, and giving relief to every family member. There won't be an increase in taxes on any American family earning less than $400,000. So he has a robust agenda, and I really think it's a time for the American people to encourage Congress, regardless of the outcome of those Georgia races, to get back to work on behalf of the citizens of the United States.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, listen, you've brought up the pandemic. We certainly need to talk about it. It has been economically devastating for women. We've written a lot about that at the 19th. We know that women were the majority of the workforce and the majority of the folks who've been forced out in droves, really exposing those issues of gender inequality and the reality that our economies will need to address as the country attempts to reopen. So, what do you think the long-term impacts of this are for women, and how should our government be thinking about this?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because not only have women lost their jobs for last in, first out, but also many of them have been forced to walk away from the workforce because of the responsibilities they have to care for their children, disproportionately still resting on women. And so I'm a huge advocate, Errin, as you know, for paid leave, paid sick days, workplace flexibility, which obviously the COVID-19 has demanded, ensuring that we have workplaces that are free from sexual harassment, from discrimination of any form whatsoever. And we also have to provide the support services that so many Americans are facing right now with mental health challenges. This COVID-19 has wreaked havoc on our stability and our certainty. And so ensuring that those who want to seek healthcare services, mental health care services, have them available under the Affordable Care Act. They are required to be made available on par with physical health care, but we also have to remove the stigma and encourage people to access those important resources. And again, women disproportionately face a stress in this environment and are going to need support services. So again, equal pay, paid leave, paid sick days, workplace flexibility, a culture that's free of discrimination, including sexual harassment, and ensuring that we are providing the safety net and support system for working families across America who are truly suffering.
You know, I can't let you get out of here without asking you about Vice President-elect Kamala Harris's role as a trailblazer. I want to start by asking you why it matters and what it might mean for our country's political imagination going forward.
Well, so first of all, I start with the basic premise, Errin, that diversity is a strength. I think that President-elect Biden selected not only a competent, experienced public servant with a track record of leadership, with a track record of fighting for people who didn't have a voice at the table. And so for all those reasons, she was a perfect running mate. But he also wanted somebody whose life experiences would be different than his own. And he wanted somebody who had an independent mind and would be willing to push him and share that unique perspective based on her life experience. The daughter of a Jamaican father and an Indian American mom, immigrant family who came to our country and looked for a better opportunity. In a sense, she has lived the American dream. And Joe Biden has lived his version of the American dream. And I think as you look at the cabinet that he selected, and I was so happy beginning with the national security and diplomatic team that they told their stories, because it was important to the president-elect that people understand that the folks that he's putting in these leadership positions aren't just experienced and smart and have a track record, but that they are empathetic and represent the core values of that American story. And so having, for the first time ever, a woman, for the first time ever, a Black person, for the first time ever, having an Indian American person, breaking all kinds of barriers means that children of all races across our country will now have a new vision of what the second most powerful person in our country looks like. And I think that that is an enormous benefit, not just to our children, but look, my 92-year-old mom thought she'd never live to see a Black person be president. And now she not only got to see that, but she gets to see Kamala Harris. And so we all stand a little taller, I think, when we see representation that looks like us. But I also think it's important for every American to get used to this new vision of what a powerful, ambitious leader looks like. And so for a whole host of reasons, from diversity at the table, presenting new perspectives being important, to representation, and to recognizing the responsibility, as she is quick to say from her mother's lips, that she has to leave that door open and make sure that just because she's the first, she now has a responsibility to make sure she's not the last.
Absolutely. And, during the campaign, you were among a group of women who pushed back against racial and gendered narratives around the Veep stakes process, and then during the general election against Harris and others as part of the We Got Her Back campaign. And so as somebody who saw the first Black president and first lady come under attack for their race and gender, why was it important for you to do that this year? And how concerned are you that those kinds of themes could persist once Vice President-elect Harris takes office?
They will persist. And you're right. I certainly saw everything from President Obama's legitimacy being questioned by the birther nonsense led by President Trump, I might add, that tried to question whether he was born in our country, accusations that he was a Muslim, accusations trying to make him feel like an other and delegitimize him. And then certainly former First Lady Michelle Obama suffered the same kind of racist, sexist tropes. And I think what happened this time is the group of women you referred to, Errin, we just said to ourselves, you know what? Enough is enough. That people who are in these positions of breaking barriers are going to get attacked, but they shouldn't have to suffer that alone. They shouldn't have to defend themselves. And one of the ways to ending this kind of atrocious behavior is to call it out. And for those of us who have voices, who are in positions of power and authority around the country, to say to not just the media, which we did through the letter, but to say to everybody, if you treat people who are in leadership positions, women who are in leadership positions, by a double standard, if you make them compete on an uneven playing field, we're not going to just give you a free pass. We're going to call it out each and every time we see it. And that's how we begin to change the culture. And we need male allies in this fight too. This shouldn't just be up to women to fight this battle. We need men who are in positions of authority and power to recognize the importance of that even playing field, and to recognize that our country will actually be stronger with women at the table. I am so delighted that there are more women in Congress than ever before, regardless of party. When they're making decisions about our uteruses, I want people with uteruses at the table.
Absolutely.
And, right?
Absolutely.
It's sensible. And we're half the population. We're half the workforce. We're graduating from college at higher rates than men. And so let's make sure that we are leveling that playing field, and that anybody who has a voice, which includes every single American, fights for that equality and calls out these ridiculous racist and sexist tropes and language that's used to describe women. It's derogatory, where if you use the same language, either you wouldn't use the language to describe a man, or if you did, it would be a compliment.
Yeah. Well, listen, last question is, and I think I know the answer, but just in case, folks aren't listening or they might be trying to recruit you, what's next for you? And could we see Valerie Jarrett in a Biden-Harris administration?
I have pledged to help President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris in any way I can. I'm very close to members of their transition team. In fact, my former chief of staff is the executive director of the transition. I'm so proud of him. But I am not going in the administration. I will be cheering from the positions where I'm heading up not-for-profits that I know will be working with the administration. And I am here to provide whatever sage counsel I can. But for now, as you know, Errin, I am a grandmother.
Yes.
I am devoted to my grandson, just as my parents were to my daughter and my grandmother was to me. And people who go into public service should really be prepared to give it their all. And I've done that for half of my career. And in this next chapter of my life, I will be on the outside cheering those on the inside.
Well deserved. Listen, Valerie, this has been such a robust and enlightening conversation. I really appreciate it. I think it really sets the table for 2021. And it is exciting to think about the women who will have seats at that table and what they will do in a range of leadership roles. So thank you again for your perspective. And I'll also be calling on you in 2021 and beyond. So thanks again.
I wish you would, Errin. I wish you the very best. Thank you all.
Thanks to Errin Haines and Valerie Jarrett for that terrific conversation. Now, I'm pleased to bring on our Washington correspondent, Amanda Becker, to introduce this interview with Kellyanne Conway. Over to you, Amanda.
Thank you for joining us today for this conversation about the women's electorate. We are thrilled to have Kellyanne Conway here with us to talk about women in the 2020 election. Kellyanne Conway has spent her career in Republican politics as a pollster, pundit, and most recently a top advisor to President Donald Trump. Thank you for joining us today.
It's really a pleasure to be with you and your audience, Amanda. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. So, we'll get right into kind of breaking down what we saw in November. The president, I think most people would agree, did better with women overall than was expected in many circles, and with white women in particular. So to give people a little bit of an idea, and these are exit poll numbers, so they could change in the coming months. Trump won about 42% of women overall, and he won about 55% of white women. That was not what polls were showing heading into this election, and I've heard you weigh in on what some of this polling looked like and how things turned out. But what were the polls and the analysts and the media maybe even missing about women going into this election, and what do you think the results taught us?
Well, Amanda, when I even hear the term, quote, women's vote, I still cringe after all these years in consulting and governance, because it treats us all like we're a monolith. In my 30 years of doing this kind of business, I had never a single time heard the phrase men's vote or men's issues. So what are women's issues? The idea is that men can think about everything. They can do war and famine. They can do economy and regulation, a little bit of healthcare, education, social security, social safety net over there, crime, drugs, and gangs, a nuclear capability. And somehow women are limited to what? A cluster of issues, a much smaller cluster of issues that we call women's issues. So first and foremost, the polls and the politicians and the presidents ought to respect the fact that no group of voters is monolithic, and that we voters, particularly women, we throw so many different individuals, images, ideas, issues, impressions into our big voter cauldron, stir it all up, and then make our choice. Women do tend to be late in the game deciders. We like to wait until all the debates are done. We like to wait until you see who the vice presidential selections are, for example, or what might happen in the October surprises. I think this year was very different because of mail-in balloting. So you had many people who otherwise would be paying attention up until the last moment, until election day, casting their vote early before that final debate, for example, and before some of the other twists and turns of the campaign election. I think the main reason that the polls got women wrong have little to do with women and everything to do with the polls, that they're not listening carefully enough to people as individuals and what motivates them, and the difference between what they may agree on issue by issue and what motivates and intensifies that vote, what's going to compel them to the polls. So the presumption for many people is that, oh, women don't like Donald Trump's tone in his tweets, so they're going to vote against him. That is, again, that's a conclusion in search of evidence if you're trying to apply it to all women. And then maybe you found women who don't mind that, but wish that hope that their taxes don't go up, or are happy that their small business is thriving, or are worried about grandma in the nursing home with COVID. So I think that we ought to be respecting each individual voter and each group of voters as the unique sentient people that they are. And the polls were a real hot mess, and it's a shame because I think it does suppress some people from coming out to vote. They'll say, well, my candidate can't possibly win, or my candidate is so far ahead, he or she doesn't need my help. And we don't want that kind of effect on democracy. We want people who want to vote to be able to come out and vote. The other thing about women is, women and men usually care about the same issues, but sometimes they look at them very differently. And I think this year was a particularly consequential year for the female voter, for women across America, because we are already the chief healthcare officers of our households. We are 14 points more likely to go to a doctor. Some men wouldn't even go to the doctor unless we reminded them to. But women are disproportionately the healthcare consumers and the healthcare providers. And so if you were a majority who are receiving healthcare and making decisions for our family members, including elderly relatives on healthcare, and we also are a majority of the healthcare providers, then women had a certain stake in 2020 that nobody could have seen coming early on, which is COVID-19. And that ended up being a very defining issue for many Americans and a top issue. But also there are people, women didn't say, oh, now I can't care about the economy, or I don't care about national security and safety. They did indeed. And so I think women will continue to surprise us. Sometimes they repeat history, sometimes they make it as voters. But I would like to end this part of the conversation with what I think is a very important insight about women. Women continue to be a majority of the electorate in presidential years. And that's been true since 1964. So it is women in this country who actually decide who our president and vice presidents are.
So it's early December. The votes have been counted. They're almost finished recounting Georgia again. The Electoral College will vote in a couple of weeks. The transition has slowly started in terms of the GSA coordinating with Biden's campaign. You talked about, we need to be patient. We need to wait for the votes. The president was saying something slightly different in those early days after the election. What's next? Are we going to see this move into more of a normal transition period, do you think? And, what are the takeaways going forward?
Sure. Well, the president wants to exhaust all of his legal avenues, as he has made clear many times, and his team is doing that. I see in the paper they're doing that. They're going to different states and trying to do that. And of course, that is his right. At the same time, it's President Trump who freed up the GSA money and authorized them to go ahead and start the transition process for the Biden-Harris team, because we want the engines of government to keep going. And you always need a peaceful transfer of democracy, no matter whose administration goes into whose administration. There's no question. If you look at the vote totals in the Electoral College tally, it looks like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will prevail. And I assume the electors will certify that and will be made official. I remember for us, it was certified, I want to say November 28th or so. Al Gore conceded on December 13th to George W. Bush. So sometimes these things take a little bit longer. And the reason I counseled vigilance and patience on election night and the day after, and a couple of days after, Amanda, is very simple, which is that our democracy deserves that. I'm yet to see any big groundswell of vote tallies to push it in the other direction. And at the same time, I think the president has a right to exhaust his legal possibilities. We as a nation will move forward because we always do. We're a strong, sturdy democracy. And if there's anything I can ever do to help future administrations, they can count on me.
You touched on this a little bit about voters' motivations and women's motivations. Do you, for the women who did back the president again in his reelection bid this year, do you think that it was himself, his specific policies, the overall Republican brand? White women do, trend Republican. The last time I believe a Democratic president won white women was Bill Clinton's second term. What were they responding to? And do you think that issues that you mentioned, like the pandemic and coronavirus and the economy, what do you see looking at these results that was most compelling for those voters?
Sure, it's a combination of factors, certainly with women at the polls this time. And again, no one dominant issue. However, COVID-19 and the economy, and I think just stability, so certainly social unrest from the summer was also a factor in many people's conversations, if not their votes. And that is important as well. Women are not beholden to just a bunch of sound bites or screeds or someone else's opinion of the situation or telling them. And I think we women don't like to be told, here's what to think, here's how women are going to vote, here's what's important to you. It's up to us to tell the professionals what's important. And I don't think enough of the professionals are listening carefully to women who really are increasingly, the leaders politically and in government. Certainly these last couple of years, the president, I think, followed suit on his comfort level of elevating women to positions of power and authority and influence, like he did in New York real estate way back before it was, quote, accepted or done, as they say. And of course, the Trump Corporation, the Trump campaign, the Trump White House. And I think it's important to have women have a seat at the table. And the other thing I wanted to say about women in 2020, which has not gotten enough coverage, which we saw coming this summer, is the big issue conspicuous by its absence: abortion. So when in past Democratic conventions, that's all you heard about. It was a woman's right to choose, abortion, we're going to safeguard reproductive rights. The Washington Post did a very fascinating study that you can pull easily. They did this study about how many times at the Republican National Convention and how many times at the Democratic National Convention different words or phrases were used. And according to the Washington Post analysis of the two-party conventions, the pro-life or abortion and any similar phraseology was used 31 times at the Republican National Convention, and pro-choice, abortion, women's right to choose, basically used 0 times, according to the Washington Post. I mean, that's just a phenomenal, earth-shattering transition from where the Democratic Party's messaging and priorities had been in the past. And it's very fascinating to me that this time, particularly with a woman on the Democrats' ticket running for vice president, that you heard very little. I don't recall the following women saying anything about it or anything major about it for an extended moment in their convention speeches. Michelle Obama, Hillary Clinton, Jill Biden, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Kamala Harris. It's pretty remarkable. Nancy Pelosi is pretty remarkable. But I'm really happy about that. Not just because I'm pro-life. I'm really happy about it because I think it's regrettable when people say women's vote or women's issues and use it as a euphemism for abortion. That really hurts we women who are thinking about just a panoply of issues at all times. And even if that's your number one issue, even if abortion's your number one concern or it's not in your top 10, that's the beauty of the women's vote. It's just it's as diverse as the women who comprise the women's vote.
You mentioned a minute ago that the president has elevated women within his organizations, including the White House. I saw you in a prior interview point out that, you are the first woman to have run a winning presidential campaign in 2016. And you said, it was Donald Trump who put me in that role. And, granted, I'm not in the White House, we're outsiders looking in, but it does look like some of the women have had more staying power in this administration. especially in certain roles. And the one that comes to my mind, of course, is press secretary, because I'm a journalist. For some women who don't support the president, they don't like kind of some of the stuff he said about women or the ways he chooses to talk about women. Do you think there's a disconnect between that, what we see publicly sometimes, and kind of how President Trump interfaces with the women in his inner circle and in the workplace?
Sure. Well, it is true that when history is written, they'll say Kellyanne was the first woman to run a successful campaign. But I always want the rest of the sentence to be there, which is, and it's Donald Trump who put me there, for a very simple reason, Amanda. I was 49 when that happened, and I had worked arduously in Republican politics and polling. I had my own company for years. I was the only one of the Republican pollsters who has a law degree and such. But there was a certain, exclusion of me from the party and the big job sometimes. I didn't much care because I found my work elsewhere. But, I never got the big gig. And a lot of those folks didn't win. In fact, most of them didn't. And now some of them are never Trump consultants. Some of them you don't hear from anymore. Some of them pretend they didn't lose miserably. But it's Donald Trump who elevated me and then, more importantly, empowered me. When he asked me to be campaign manager, he and I didn't realize no woman had ever done it for a Republican campaign. I had no idea. I know Donna Brazil. She's a friend of mine. And I knew of the other two women who had run Democratic presidential campaigns. But it wasn't until a CNN anchor, a female, said to me the next day, gee, you're the first one to do it for Republican and the fourth ever. And the reason I didn't know that is Donald Trump never said to me, I want you to be the campaign manager because you're a woman. He wanted me to do it because he thought I had a great political instincts and organizational skills, great on TV, and very good with the staff. He saw me sort of trying to mentor along some of the younger folks at a very small and underestimated underdog campaign. But I asked him if I could do three things. And he said yes to all three. And I did them almost immediately. I did them that day and that weekend before I was even officially announced. And the reason I tell you this is because it's one thing to say, we have a woman. It's another to empower and equip her to try to do something for a presidential campaign that I had recommended to three other Republican presidential campaigns and had never been done. I don't even think they're particularly genius points. I think that when you're dealing with typical politicians and typical consultants, they're too afraid to respond to our changing culture, or they're too afraid to approach the voters differently because they've been doing something the same way for so long, and they succeed at it, meaning they make a lot of money, but they didn't succeed in winning the races. And I really credit Donald Trump for not just elevating women, but empowering and equipping them. And I think that's fair. I think that's important. The other thing is he's incredibly loyal to the women who work for him. I've noticed that over time. He never stops and says, we don't go in there and say, oh, I have all these kids. I need to, But he knows, how are the kids? What are they doing? Are they online? Our son is online. What are they doing for this summer? I mean, he cares very much. I see him ask people about their families, about their elderly parents, their grandparents. And look, I think with the comments and the tweets and the tone, people can cherry pick whatever they want. I have a real problem with what many people have said. There's no question about it. But that's why I think female voters look at the whole picture. And the president has great capacity for compassion and empathy. And I believe he's done better with everyone when he has let that come to the fore.
You are, one of the people closest to the president in terms of advising him. You did leave the White House in August. I'm sure you still talk.
Today.
Today. So, did you ever say, why, did you ever advise him, why can't you, show some of this empathy we experience internally more publicly, or maybe tone down some of the stuff he was saying? Because there had to be a fear at some point that his policies and his message and his platform might get overshadowed by some of the controversial things he was saying that seemed to, in particular, offend women to a greater degree than men.
So my advice to the president is private, but I will say this because I've said it publicly, and he knows this. Of course, I advised him to show the best of him, but I would push back in this way. He showed loads of compassion, empathy. It just isn't scintillating enough to make the news chyron. Or I've seen him with veterans, with military families, when he goes to Dover when he is, he has been President Trump has been remarkable in terms of prioritizing and executing and succeeding on bringing home back to American soil hostages and detainees that were languishing in so many different countries. And that was a priority of his. And I've seen him with them and talking to their families. And then when they finally are released and they're on their way home to America, I've heard him call the parents of people who have been victims of violence. I've watched him engage with something that was among the many things in my portfolio, the drug crisis. I've seen him not just be compassionate and loving, but empathetic, because his first exposure to loss through addiction was through his own brother, Fred Jr., at the age of 42. And the president was, I think, 32 or so. And so I've seen that many times. And I've also seen him, the folks who are no longer languishing in prison long after they've paid their debt to society, even though they begged previous administrations to do that for them. It's President Trump who did that. And I've seen the president with them. We've all seen them. So it also is a matter of what people want you to see about each of them. But this presumptive compassion or empathy or feeling or not based on your gender or your politics. I'll give you a funny anecdote. I once walked into the Oval Office, and this is several years ago now, and the president said, "Did you like my tweet?" And I said, "Oh," I said, "it takes me 12 seconds to get down here in 3-inch heels. Which one? Did I miss it?" And he said the tweet, and I said, "Yes, I saw that one." He said, "Did you like it?" And I said, "It wasn't in my top 1,000 most favorite." And he said, "Oh, well, so-and-so called. He loved it." And I said, "Well, so-and-so is 80 and male and a billionaire, and he would love it." In other words, like, I don't particularly like it. I like your tweets when you talk about policy or the foreign leaders who are coming to visit, or that you're pushing for more, relief, et cetera.
Let's go to a couple audience questions. I got 2 on the number of women elected to Congress this year. Diane in Willowbrook, and Colleen in Indianapolis, and Danielle in Alexandria all weighed in on this. They had, variation of the same question, which is, we have a record number of women in Congress next year. There are 117 in the House. There are also a record 28 Republicans. So that set a Republican record. Republican women did very well this year in their races. Do you think that as we see more women in Congress, that is going to change the way legislation is passed, or, are we going to see different policy areas highlighted? Do you think that women might be better equipped to cross the aisle and reach bipartisan consensus on some issues, particularly maybe issues that disproportionately impact women, like caregiving for elderly parents, childcare, paid leave, that sort of thing? Like, what is your takeaway of the success of the Republican women at the congressional level, and how might that, change what we see over the next 2 years?
Sure. Well, I appreciate all those questions and have heard variations of them over the years, because there's a natural excitement when more women start to ascend in greater numbers in places where perhaps they've not been at parity, because politics is one of the last places really where women are choose to want to run, choose to want to engage at the electoral level. Women are very engaged at the political and policy level, but to put yourself as a candidate is quite different than being an active voter. And so it is exciting, and people always are so hopeful that this will lead to words and events like consensus and bipartisanship and the like. We have a female Speaker of the House. She was there all last year, and at the end of right before the election, wouldn't pass additional relief that President Trump was willing to sign into law. I guess not to give, quote, him a win.
That's not entirely accurate, I think, from my point of view. So we might have to agree to disagree on that.
I think she's pretty sharp-elbowed and sharp-tongued, and I don't see her trying to build bipartisan consensus on very much. It does sound great to have the first. I know that firsthand, but it's really, what do you do once you're there? So saying it's great to have all these women it is great, and I applaud it. And I'm particularly so proud of those Republican female candidates who put themselves in the arena, even if they didn't win, because they do that against all these stupid, stereotypes and tropes and caricatures. and they just burrow through. I mean, the easiest thing to be in the last couple of years was sort of like an anti-Trump Republican or a Democratic resistor. So that's easy. Harder is to explain to the voters why you think fewer regulations and lower taxes actually stimulate growth and create jobs in your area, why you are pro-life, or why you respect the Second Amendment, or why you believe that the American first foreign policy and domestic policy are the way to go. So, but I would say even when people talk about healthcare and caregiving and education, there's a tinge of that even sort of narrow casts women in the Congress. I want women to be the chairman of the subcommittee on Homeland Security or the ranking member for defense appropriations, and indeed they are. I think it's a shame that Senator Dianne Feinstein of California, very well respected, including by me, has been forced out, give up her gavel from the Judiciary Committee. And I think the president elevating a lot of females to the federal judiciary has been a big untold story of his presidency also. Most recently, Amy Coney Barrett, but many at the circuit courts and the U.S. district courts, and that's important too. So yes, hopefully women who are natural problem solvers and consensus builders and who are genuinely interested in what people who disagree with them have to say and to find agreement. And I found that even helped me in my work in the White House because I have lots of relationships across the aisle. And it does help. So we're always hopeful of that. What happens, Amanda, is when politics overtakes that sort of shared gender, if you will, or shared values or shared life experiences, I will say, caring for elderly parents, having children, being let go from a job, not getting a promotion, et cetera. When politics seeps in, then we go from comity, C-O-M-I-T-Y, to comedy, C-O-M-E-D-Y. And so I'm hopeful, always hopeful. And I also just want to say again, I really give a ton of credit for the people who put themselves in the political ring. It's not easy. Years ago, you had to have fire in your belly. Now you have to have bile in your throat too, and swallow really hardly with all the things that are thrown at you. But a record number of women in the Congress and a record number of women running for office is pretty remarkable for another reason. There's always a big gender difference in running for office in the first place. That men sort of wake up every morning, look in the mirror and see the next United States senator, and women wait to be asked to run. This has to be somebody else's idea. Like, Amanda, you know what? You would make a great congresswoman. Have you ever thought about it? Or you should go for that open district house seat in our state. And women are like, oh no, me? I don't think so. I'm this, I'm that, and the other. And so I think that women build confidence in other women and encourage them to actually follow their public policy proclivities and their heart for governance into a candidacy which they otherwise may not consider.
Well, we are almost out of time, but before we let you go, Ms. Conway, I have a question about kind of what your next steps are. You left the White House in August and have, been informally advising the president since, but where might we see you take your next steps?
Well, I appreciate you asking. I think the whole world knows I left the White House voluntarily and on a high note, and with the blessing of the president and others there, fully recognizing that I left for my 4 children. I've always been there, quote, for them, but I wanted to be there more with them since they're all mostly online and a couple of them exclusively online for school. And basically, Amanda, that is a decision and a choice and a circumstance that women and men, but women all across this country can relate to. So I don't think my situation is so unique. I think the outcomes are very similar and relatable to many Americans. I see article after article after article about the fact that we right now have fewer women in the workforce than we have in several decades. And it's mostly because women are leaving the workforce to help the kids at home or to help an elderly relative or both. And I think that's dramatically changing our workplace and our work right now, sort of under our noses. But for me in the future, I'm going to be patient, and I will announce what I'm doing next in good time. So that'll be exciting. And I really look forward to the next chapters. I'm sure I'll have a foot in politics still, but I really loved public service. And the one thing I would like to do is continue in some way in a nonprofit or public service capacity at some level, or to support those who are, because I entered public service on my 50th birthday. Talk about a late bloomer. And I really recommend it to people if you could squeeze it into your career at any point. I'm going to take my opioid work out with me. I'm going to give some speeches, going to do some writing, quote consulting like everyone does. But first and foremost, I'm really just enjoying my time, not in high heels, and with the kids and helping to support them, because my kids they're privileged. They go to great schools and they have, present parents, and they have, people who love them and look out for them, and they're fed. And what this pandemic has done is create another pandemic within it for many of our nation's school children. And I keep reading those articles as well. So I think I'm greatly concerned. I wouldn't mind being part of the solution on the back end on how we make up for all that lost time and really the lost, the mental health challenges that go with it, certainly for many of our youth, and just the lost time that so many of them have had. We all know about the summer slide, but now we've had sort of the COVID-19 slide as well for some of these kids.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks to all of you for tuning in today for our last Live with the 19th of 2020. And thanks to you, our members, whose support makes our journalism and live events free for all. We're in the middle of our fall member drive, and we'd love it if you join them and us today at 19thnews.org/membership. Have a safe and healthy holiday season, and we'll see you all back here in January.